That's it. Now, stop the bleeding. Focus. Good. You succeeded. Mastering your breathing. It will open many doors for you. Now, it won't solve everything, but it will help. You will continue to grow stronger. Thank you.
Why having access to your DNA fully and uncovering all of your, the access to all quote-unquote ancestors and lifetimes, which are one and the same in essence. Quick little anime reference, you know what I'm saying? You think of ancestors and like your connection to their abilities is like from the anime to your eternity, where Fushi the immortal, kind of from Chinese mythology. Fushi, whenever somebody he was close to transitions, he now has their abilities. And he loses their abilities whenever he can't remember them. That's key. Like, he loses the ability to tap into his DNA, aka, being able to embody the powers of one of his loved ones from not remembering. But simply, I ain't gonna make this a long thing because we done talked about this in length. This is about just sitting down and really realizing what it means to be, speaking of Fushi the immortal, what it means to be immortal or to never quote unquote die in essence. You see, in most cases what'll cause you to transition is you no longer having a purpose. So how, say for instance, some people in most cases may transition once it's like, oh shit, I done it, like bam, it's done, you know what I'm saying? But if you got access to multiple aspects of your DNA, to multiple ancestors, and things of this nature, then you could shift, your experience. Kind of like, again, another reference would be everything, everywhere, all at once, where you can align with a part of yourself from a timeline that you haven't expressed in this lifetime in order to, quote unquote, keep living. You feel me? So the ability to be immortal in that sense of it would be to be able to, have access to your DNA, have access to your ancestors, have access to your quote-unquote past lives. All basically just different ways of us saying the same thing, trying to conceptualize it from a human perspective so it comes in different packages, but it's all saying the same thing, that truly, you are immortal because you're able to jump from one aspect of your DNA to another. That's what also genes connected to genius, like your genius, you're smart, you're able to tap into a lot of wisdom by being able to tap into all these different aspects of yourself. You feel me? So it's also that connection as well. So activating your DNA, connecting with ancestors, knowing your quote-unquote past lives is so important in the essence of you, being immortal. And it's a paradox because by being immortal, certain parts of you die, just like, again, so having access to multiple timelines of yourself. Let's just say that you know, like you got access to one part of your DNA, or one, let's use the perspective like you got access to one timeline, you know what I'm saying? But within that timeline, you know, that part of yourself is gonna be transitioning, like, you know, within the next month, to put time on it. Let's just say that part of your, you know, that timeline, as it's relative to where you at in this now moment, you know what I'm saying? That timeline is gonna expire, you know, or that part of yourself just got hit by a car in that timeline. So now, you know, that part of yourself from that timeline won't be able to be fully embodied in this now moment, because it just transitioned, you feel me? So you gotta jump to another timeline or another DNA access point, you know what I'm saying, in order to, you know, keep your bodysuit going. Because otherwise, you know, again, if you're still connected to a timeline where that part of yourself done transition, then, you know what I'm saying, you're gonna be, you know, feeling like you transition, you feel me? You know what I'm saying? Or AKA what some people call die, or now the little word for it, to unalive yourself. Yeah, you gonna feel unalive, like you unalived yourself, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, that's one of the keys. Let's say one of the keys and importances to, you know, activating DNA, having access to the, you know, to our whole entire software, you know what I'm saying, so to speak. You know, having access to our entire algorithm software on a, you know, ancestral DNA, you know what I'm saying, type of level. So it has a meaning behind it. It's not just like, oh, you know, oh man, because it almost feels like a regurgitated thing without you really, really knowing why, though. Like, why your DNA is so important. Like, why knowing about your past lives and all this is so important, you know. And that part is like, from the perspective of course, not making the same mistakes, in essence, being able to, you know, respond differently than you did, respond differently than your ancestors did, you know what I'm saying, respond differently than, you know, whatever spirits you connected to, you know, did in the past, you know what I'm saying. But again, it's all simultaneously connected in this now moment as well, you know. Hence why we experience moments of like being depressed, probably feeling more depressed because you're having more access to, you know, timelines, a part of your DNA that is, you know, going through a tough moment or have transition or something of that nature. But it's only depression, like reason why you don't transition completely, because you're also accessing other parts of your DNA that's like having a fulfilling life, you know what I'm saying? You know, and that's where also like why a lot of stuff is so based on mental health, because, you know, feeling multiple timelines at once, aka like the movie being everywhere all at once, you know, being everything everywhere all at once, excuse me. You know, you gotta be mentally stable, you know, to have that awareness, to have that access to all those multiple timelines without, you know, being confused, without being overwhelmed. You know, you gotta ground your circuit. You know, you gotta be rooted. You know what I'm saying? But that is, you know, one of the reasons why the DNA is so important and having it activated. And if you care about that, you know, because I feel like, you know, within this realm, you know, there's different factions, you know, of politics, of spirit politics, you know, energetic politics, where some beings might feel like, you should just have access to one timeline in this lifetime, you know what I'm saying? And you shouldn't activate your DNA, you know what I'm saying? Just to, put that out there, that there is some beings that may feel like that, you know what I'm saying? They may have had a bad experience with, again, like they may have been overwhelmed by that energy. They may have had DNA that wasn't agreeable, you know what I'm saying, in the sense of like a bunch of horrible things happening in other timelines or with their ancestors, so they disagree with the whole DNA activation thing. Because say, for instance, think about it like this: what if you were having a great life in your individual experience right now? You know what I'm saying? You just happen to be, you happen to be in that space, but on a ancestral DNA level, though, there are more egregious things, more, toxic or, lower vibrational things on the timelines, then, it will feel like, oh, dang, like, why I gotta, access that, you know what I'm saying, when my life is so great right now, you feel me? A person having that type of experience could feel like, well, no, I don't want to, activate all of that, that pain and struggle, you feel me? So it's like, peeping out also, again, like this is where all of the little, spirit politics, different politics between different beings could come in at, you feel me? But, that's the climbing Jacob's ladder, quote unquote, or having, the rainbow bridge, the rainbow connection, which also relates to chakras, but that's also having full access to, your DNA, full access to all, quote unquote, lifetimes, full access to all, quote unquote, ancestors. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's why also, and I'll leave on that tip, that's one of the reasons why the main aspects of being spiritually tapped in are, being spiritually healthy in essence requires you to not have strong attachments, because if you have a strong attachment, you may want to hold on to a certain timeline. This also goes into toxic ego, like also why, like, oh, you gotta have ego debts, because you gotta get used to letting go of certain timelines or access points. I would like to even say it almost like a time traveler type of energy, like a multi-dimensional traveler type of energy, you know what I'm saying? Like, in order to jump from one access point to another, you can't take no baggage with you. You can't have no attachments. If you attach to the timeline 1, trying to jump to timeline 2, you know what I'm saying? Obviously, you know what I'm saying? You won't, like, you're going to feel a jerk, kind of like a dog in the yard on a chain that run towards somebody and then get jerked back, you know what I'm saying? Because of the chain around his neck. You feel me? So, and hence why the terminology is speaking of a chain being around your neck and not being able to have, jump to different access points. Hence the terminology also in relating to activating DNA. Another word that is used is unlocking. You know what I'm saying? To unlock your DNA, to take off the chain. You feel me? So when you take off that chain, now, you know what I'm saying, you have that now you could be able to be free to connect with all the different access points. You know what I'm saying? You could travel internally and then externally more freely, but let's just say you travel internally, more freely, when you, again, let go of attachments, are not too attached to your persona. You're not too attached to being, you know, Carl Ray. You know what I'm saying? You could access the timeline when you was in Tokyo. You could access the timeline when, you know what I'm saying, you was in Mexico. You could access the timeline of when you was, you know what I'm saying, in timelines when countries didn't exist. You feel me? I was trying to think of a little way to say it, but that's the whole, you know what I'm saying, spiritual, political / politics perspectives, all the different perspectives, politics, you know what I'm saying, and to some that become dogmatic about it, but no judgment, with religions, all these different, basically, philosophies and politics around, spiritual practices and, and connecting with source energy. A lot of that, again, is going into the fact of, again, like DNA activation, having access to these multiple aspects of self, you feel me? But just leaving on the note to finish off on, this is why, the activation of your DNA, the connection to quote-unquote ancestors, you know what I'm saying, the understanding of quote-unquote past lives becomes so important. And for yourself, asking yourself, do you want, access to this ability? And if so, then, you want to do the things that are healthy towards you having access to your whole being. All the spiritual practices, all the foods that you know what I'm saying, that's healthy for your quote-unquote DNA, you know what I'm saying? Eating foods that maybe some of your ancestors ate that technically you never really ate in this lifetime, but because you're accessing those different timelines, now you have a urge to eat, soursop when you ain't never grew up around a soursop tree, in this timeline, in this lifetime. But, it's like doing all those things, you know what I'm saying? You never knew what a crystal was from your household, but, the parts of yourself from other timelines, you know what I'm saying, know what a crystal is and how to connect with it, But, that's just all of it in a nutshell. And, of course, along with all the videos where I done talk for hours about these things, because you can't win for losing when it comes to the fact of, like, somebody's going to dislike and favor everything you do. So some people don't want to listen to long videos. Some people love it. Some people don't like short little sound bites and quick videos, but some people love it. I got a little bit of both, you know what I'm saying? And, they all tie together regardless if you like long videos or short videos or however your, perspective is on that. I got the long videos talking about this, but I never really talked about it like this right here, And again, importantly, to just let it sink in, like, the reason why, because that's how it came to me, like the reason why some people transition in certain moments, in essence, is from, only having access to timelines of themselves that's, in pain, suffering, or transitioning, but I'll just say transitioning, like they only having access to most of the timelines where, they transition at this point, or they don't have access to their DNA in general. So if they just only living in connection mainly with this one timeline because they super rooted, you know, eating sluggish foods. And it's not making it bad or good. It's just like chemistry in so many ways, you know what I'm saying? You know, chemistry, you know, but it's just the chemistry of, you know, the way things maneuver and operate, you know, the science of it. You know, if they not accessing, you know, eating, they strongly in their root chakra, strongly in their body, which again could be a healthy thing, but again, anything in extremes could also become toxic. But if they strongly in that space, then, you know, they only have access to the timeline they currently in their bodysuit, you know what I'm saying, as the persona they are in this lifetime. So, you know, when it's time to transition, they won't have access to another timeline or access point, you know. And this kind of goes a little deep. I won't go too deep into it, but how Pisces energy are like the fish, you know, swimming through the subconscious, are like beings who have a strong access to all these different points, you know, find it easy to go through a quote unquote death and rebirth cycle, like where they could up and just like, all right, I don't even have to finish that project. I'll just jump into this project, you know. Or that's also, again, like people are being, because again, on a mundane level, let's just say on a mundane level, it looks like people who could change careers with ease, people who could change their philosophical or religious or, you know, spiritual perspectives, you know, they could change it with ease. Those are the beings who have a strong psychic connection and awareness of these different timelines and access points. And they could just kind of jump through them pretty easily. You know, the Pisces mainly come to mind as well because, again, that's like deep subconscious. You know, it's the last aspect of the zodiac, and a lot of it is connected to, you know, and I think of the nakshatras in Pisces, you know what I'm saying, the Vedic astrology, the nakshatras are connected to a lot of, like, you know, like Uttara Bhadrapada that I brought up, like connected to funeral cots and stuff like that. Don't mean actually necessarily transition in that sense of it, but it is connected to the quote unquote death and rebirth cycles, or the unaliving and rebirthing cycles, you feel me? But, you know, that, and to leave this note, because I feel like I should bring this up before ending, you know, and this doesn't mean like that we looking necessarily, you're not necessarily looking for physical immortality as much as it's like an energetic immortality, you know, because once you become consciously aware of having access to all these, you know, these parts of yourself, you know, not only, so it goes both ways, not only you could, you know, live a long time within your vehicle, within your body in this now moment, but also when you transition out of your body, you're going to have access to that awareness of like all those different, you know, parts of yourself, you know. So that's why, one of the reasons why, you know, DNA activation or unlocking your DNA or having access to ancestors, having access to the multidimensional aspect of yourself, whatever way you want to serve up that word salad, you know what I'm saying? That's why it's so important. And why the now moment, because now is the vibrate. So why the now moment is so important, because it's like a quote unquote time machine or multi-dimensional machine that gives you access to your past and future all in this one moment. So with that being said, happy now. Now is a vibrate. Peace.